to reduce spending on agriculture. What a mistake. What a mistake. This is what has come to haunt us.
All right, interesting. Let's go to our next speaker, Ernest Ruzindaza, who was the permanent secretary at the Ministry of Agriculture in Rwanda, and before that you were Director of Planning. Just picking up there on what Minister Florence Chenoweth was saying about the neglect of agriculture in African governments. We're always struck by the figures that African governments many years ago pledged to spend 10% of their national budgets on agriculture, and it's only about half a dozen countries that have actually met that target. Some perhaps are on the way to doing that, but when you look at the similar figures for the Asian Green Revolution, it was double that figure. About 20% of national budgets were going into agriculture. In your view, you can tell us what's going on in Rwanda, and I know you're going to say that the picture is much better in Rwanda, and many would argue that it is one of the better examples. Why is there that continuing neglect of a problem which is clearly staring everybody in the face, as Minister Florence has illustrated?
Thank you, Madam Zainab. I agree with Madam Minister. But what I want to say is that African countries committed to implement what we call CAADP, Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. That was in 2003. All African countries signed on that program, and they committed to increase the budget of agriculture at least 10% of public budget, and also achieve 6% growth every year. And that results, of course, in key indicators like poverty reduction, food security, and nutrition indicators. I can say that from that commitment to real implementation, African countries started in 2007. They signed in 2003, but they started to implement in 2007. That was the first component, the first compact was signed in Rwanda, Kigali, in 2007 to start the implementation of that program. When it comes to public expenditure, I know that each country has its own priorities, but from the assessment that was conducted by different agencies like IFPRI, we've seen that in order to achieve 6% growth, we need to invest in agriculture, at least 10% or more than that, more than 10%. So in some of African countries, 10% is being achieved. 10% budget in public finance is being achieved. I think more than 10 countries now are putting their money in agriculture, and the results are really very high.
What's yours in Rwanda?
Ours is 13%. So we started, and we are committed to implement that program, and we reached also that budget. Another information that I can give to you is that 38 countries in Africa, 38 from 53, they have signed the compact. So they have accepted to implement that comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program and embrace the principle of that program.
All right. Can I also ask you, something that Minister Florence Chenoweth also raised, which is you can't achieve resilience building for improved food security and nutrition unless you adopt a multi-sectoral approach. There's no point the Minister of Agriculture acting in isolation from the Minister of Finance, who controls the purse strings, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Education even. You can't have government departments working in separate silos if you're trying to achieve food security and better nutrition. Are you doing that in Rwanda?
We are doing that. We see, I think it depends on how people plan. We have one single plan in the country. It's not said that there is agriculture, there is health. We have one single plan. We are investing in our people with different components. Agriculture being one component, health being one, and other components like education. But we are implementing one single plan. So our experience is that, for example, on food security and nutrition, it is not only the Ministry of Agriculture which is in charge of food security and nutrition. We cannot do alone without Minister of Finance. We cannot do alone without the Minister of Local Government. We can't achieve nutrition without the Minister of Health, neither without Minister of Education. and Minister of Gender, because we are dealing with something that really touch the lives of children. So Minister of Gender is also central in this program of nutrition.
Because most smallholders, and that's essentially what we are talking about, are women.
They are women, of course. 54% of the population of Rwanda is women. So in that comprehensive program of food security and nutrition, all these ministries that are doing something in rural area are really involved. And you can see that nutrition, from the assessment that we conducted, we saw that some areas where we have food staffs, they have some problems of malnutrition because of the level of education, because of infrastructure, because of communication. So nutrition is really something that is not only linked to agriculture or health, but it's something that is multifaceted, as Minister said. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your opening comments, Ernest. Let me come to you, Joe Costello. You're Minister for Trade and Development in the Republic of Ireland, and you have a long record in public service. You've worked in various guises, very committed to human rights, and you manage Ireland's development assistance budget, Irish Aid. And I don't mean this in a light way at all, but when we're looking at long-term policy engagement, what are the kind of things you are looking for? But in Ireland's case, obviously, you've had in your history in the 1840s that terrible famine where 1 million people died and 1 million people left the country. And so that's always made you in Ireland very alive to this situation, even now, this kind of historical legacy of wanting to ensure that there is food security. So to what extent does that kind of inform your vision, and what kind of drivers are you looking for?
Yes, thank you very much for that introduction. And I think this point is absolutely key to the way Ireland thinks about Irish aid and the developing world. We had in our background in the middle of the 19th century what was known as the Gurt the Mór, the Big Hunger, the famine that killed 1 million of our people and drove another 1 million of our people out of the country in the space of 2 or 3 years. So we share that, what Florrie was saying, that there's a lot of hunger and vulnerability in Africa, and indeed in relation to the 10% that African countries are pledging to give to what you might call the hunger to agriculture. So that's part of our legacy, and in many ways our aid program has always had that resonance as time went by, so that in recent years we were extraordinarily impressed by an article in the Lancet medical magazine whereby it referred to the fact that so much deaths were taking place in developing countries due to poor nutrition or malnutrition, and that stunting was a result of nutrition as well, the absence of nutrition. And that pushed us to set up what we called the hunger agenda. And we came up with the policy then of looking at the 1,000 days, the 2 years from pregnancy to the second birthday, where a mother needed good nutrition and the child in the early months and year needed good nutrition as well. So the 1,000 days and the scaling up nutrition were part and parcel of the thinking that we came up with in 2006. And that has gone on now to be developed and to be internationalized. And then in our presidency, what better issue could we put to the forefront in the 6 months from January to July than hunger, nutrition and climate change? So we put that at the very forefront of the priority of our presidency. And as a result, two central or seminal communication council decisions came out of that, and that was a council conclusion on nutrition and a council conclusion on food security. So in a sense, that is what resilience is about. Resilience is about, linking up the situation from the catastrophe to the recovery, to the rehabilitation, to the development, and putting in that within that, the important issues that are required to build up, first of all, the humanitarian side, and then to build up the structures and the support mechanisms to deal with the prevention and to deal with the response. So all of that is part and parcel that we would see as absolutely essential to a policy moving forward, and we would see it too very much as central to the post-millennium development goals, that these are central issues. So this whole idea that we're discussing here, I regard as one of the greatest priorities for all of us.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister Joe Costello. We're just looking at that partnership issue. Let's bring in Marcus Cornaro, who's Deputy Director General of the Directorate General for Development and Cooperation at the European Commission. And Marcus, I know you've had a lot of extensive experience before you took this post last year, when you worked in Mali, Zimbabwe and Uganda for the United Nations Development Programme, and you've also worked in the Foreign Office of your native Austria. But from your perspective at the European Union, what do you see are the key priorities for you in supporting this resilience agenda in the developing countries?
Thanks a lot, Zeynep. Great to be here, indeed, and to follow on fellow panelists and engage. And starting with listening to Joe and referring to the two communications, one way we try to portray resilience, and in order to avoid this becomes an overused catchword, is indeed to say to bounce back better for countries. And I think if we look at what the European Union is currently doing, we're quite good at helping countries to bounce back. But I think the agenda really for today is how to bounce back better. Now, bouncing back, as you may know, as European Union, we have been one of the larger funders in a number of programs. But it's true, if we look at this, and this is very much the analysis we did under the Irish presidency, it was very much to look at this whole thing as a food crisis issue. And we had only small inroads into what you referred to, Zeynep, as a multi-sectoral approaches. With the Share and Agir initiative. And now indeed, sort of the challenge is to go back really to the root causes of food crisis. And in doing that, we see ourselves as European Union over the next years active on the following fronts. I mean, one is to continue strong on advocacy on various international initiatives. Secondly, we have made a much more evidence-based approach to programming, where from next year onwards, we have looked much more strategically at who are our partner countries who have a track record of being food insecure, and really put food, nutrition, and rural development at the center of our next programming cycle. And I'm quite pleased to say that this will, I think, be a game changer, at least within the European Commission, as we address currently food insecure countries. We also would like to build much stronger on the linkage between basic and applied research. And Ernest, already you referred to the need to make more intelligent use of agricultural research. There is certainly also the need to ensure that smallholders would have better access to services and resources, hence look at more generally and link it more generally with an inclusive development agenda. And then the third large issue, and this is also why this European Development Day is very much coined around the post-2015, is indeed to see how we would put sort of food insecurity at the center stage of that. And yes, there we very much see that food insecurity, more generally speaking, merits certainly one strong standalone target under the post-2015 framework, but we're also aware that, in fact, in order for this to be achieved, you would need to have this also as a transversal concept, sort of hardwired back into almost anything we would be doing under EU-funded programs. And Joe, you mentioned stunting, and this is maybe a sort of one example also where we can combine as Europe the advocacy part with the implementation part. There is an ambitious World Health Assembly target to reduce stunting of children by 40% over 2025. about 70 million children affected, and we as European Union have made the commitment to shoulder at least 10% of that global effort. So there we could very well combine the global advocacy of putting the center stage by making sure that the way we operate through partnerships in countries, but also through measuring impact, that we can be seen credibly of doing part of the heavy lifting on that ambition.
You say, Marcus, that you applaud the integrationist approach, which both Rwanda and Liberia are endorsing, where you say that there are obviously social determinants as to who eats and who doesn't. You've got to incorporate all the different government agencies. You also say that there has to be an inclusive agenda. And often the argument is made is that the smallholder farmer knows what they need and they know what kind of help they require. So to what extent do you, in your lovely Brussels office, I know you go out into the countries and so on, but to what extent do you listen to the voice of the smallholder farmers? How far do you incorporate them into your agenda, or are you just dealing with lovely people like Minister Florence here at that kind of level? Because you need to be inclusive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for allowing me to get back on that. I mean, the overall catchword on that is the ownership. And the ownership starts, of course, with people around the table, the government and the governance around that particular issue. But we do with any country where we engage on a sectoral issue also make sure that we increase the outreach, the inclusion of civil society and smallholder be it unions, try to organize them and make sure that, at least that's the ambition, that no larger government-run program would be rolled out without making sure that there's a domestic accountability on the targets. So in other words, yes, we would have to agree with Rwanda and Liberia and understand where in detail the targets and the policy instruments would be. But we would be adamant to make sure that this is not just an accountability between a contract we would have with that government, but very much share that vision, develop that vision with the population, and make sure that there is domestic accountability around that.
You just wanted to interject quickly at this stage, Minister Costello.
I wanted to just interject there. Marcus, of course, has been out in the field, but just to make sure that all the bureaucrats in Brussels knew what was happening in the field, we arranged a study trip during our presidency to the safety net program in Ethiopia, which was an excellent program dealing with vulnerability, with smallholders, with development issues and landscape, climate development and so on. I think just one other point I might just make is that to be successful, any program of resilience has to have the involvement of the local community. And I think I didn't mention that when I was speaking earlier. I think that's crucial to a successful program.
And in fact, that brings us very neatly to a spokesperson of that very local community, the smallholder, vital stakeholder in all this, because Kaililu Silla is originally from Ivory Coast, but he is executive secretary of you remember that the network of farmers and agricultural producers organizations of West Africa. So he is dealing directly with the smallholder farmers. Not a farmer himself, but he's married to one. So you've got to be careful what you say. I don't know if your wife is here, but you yourself have a PhD in agricultural economics. So in a sense, you approach it both from the theoretical, but also very much from the grassroots level. And so key question to you is this, really. Do you feel that the needs and interests of the smallholder in Africa is there at the top table sufficiently?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, IFRI and CTA, and thank you, Zainab, to coordinate this, to share this, and to help us to go ahead.
Just put the microphone more to your, yeah, that's it.
Okay.
More directly on, that's it, yeah. That's it.
Thank you. Yes, my entry point will be resilience. I just want to have 2 or 3 points and come back to your question, and you will have your response through my development. The resilience, why? Because in West Africa, in particular, in each 2 years, we have a food crisis. We have also a region where 9 countries experience a war. So resilience is something very real for us. It's not just a word. So here we have a good question, because at the time we discuss about the wrong question. Here we have a good one. So it's a good question. Do we have the right answer, the right response? That's one of the things I think we need to look at very clearly. If I consider resilience, we can ask the question about before answering if the state are there or partner are there, where the trouble for resilience come from, or if you want, the shock, where the shock come from. If you look at food policy, food security and nutrition, which are the two main topics linked to this resilience. First of all, for the food security, we just agree that there is a wrong consensus, very wrong one. We said very clearly, food security should be done through the market. Everybody says so, nobody apply. It's not the case in Europe, it's not the case in America, but everybody will tell you food security means a lot of things, but at the end of the day, in the heart of the people, food security means, in particular for the donors, food security means you should rely on market to achieve your food security, to have the food at the right time, the quality, cultural food response to your needs. That's the way. So wrong answer. And in this, you look at this wrong answer, which is basically food security should be done through the market. So the question is, now the major shock in the world will come from the market. So why? Because simply we are in the trend where the subsidies and the tax will go down. So the price uncertainty, which the flexibility of the price will be something very higher. And this is one of the shock, which is one of the root from which we need to look for resilience. I think we need to look at this one as something very important for our point of view. The second one is nutrition. If you look at nutrition, is a new vision. If you want, is a new vision in terms of nutrition call for the new agenda. It's not the current agenda, the business as usual. We just focus on agriculture. We don't look at about the interaction between agriculture, between education, health, and so all this life on. But I didn't see that on the ground. In the majority of the country of West Africa, this is not the agenda. It's not.
That multi-sectoral approach
it's not the agenda, very clearly.
We talk about it, but you don't see it.
Yeah, certain of them. I think if you look at the 55 countries of West Africa, perhaps 2 or 3 have this agenda very clear. But all of them, the maximum, they don't have that one. Why? Simply because the nutrition is an institutional shock, and we need to build resilience to be able to have a clear vision in terms of this new deal. And the last one, I will finish with this one, is what I call the agenda with the plan B. The agenda with the plan B is what? Is the donors, we come to say, okay, let's look at the small Africans, they have a problem, we want to help them, but they have a plan B. The plan B is what? Is in reality a response to their own problem, their own crisis. Simple example, there is no employment somewhere, you say, okay, let's help them, but all the fund for help, it will be to give job for the donors people. That's my point.
A lot you've raised there, very interestingly enough, Kailulu. Thank you very much indeed. But just to pick you up on one thing, you say, can I ask you a very simple question? In your view, is the smallholder farmer in Africa part of the private sector or part of civil society?
I didn't get well.
The smallholder farmer in Africa, in your opinion, are they part of the private sector or are they part of civil society?
I think
because you can see arguments for either
that
side.
should be clear. I mean, the debate on that one is very clear. If you look at the investment in West Africa, 80% of the investment is made by small farmers. They are private sector for real. They are the one.
So they're private sector.
They are the one, the real one. They are not looking for the subsidies to come. They are already there. So that's also one of the...
Because we tend to think of peasant movements much more, I mean, I use that word in inverted commas, as part of civil society. Often.
No, that's the wrong way of having this analysis. Why? If you look at, again in Africa, a lot of people, government think to have private sector inside, we need to have exoneration of fiscal exoneration, we need to give them land, we need to give them all this, all the things. But if you look at the investment, the real investment in the ground, on the ground, and you compare, there is a very good report of FAO report on the investment in agriculture in Africa, in the world. And the small farmers, the main investor in Africa. And also, I do believe that there is a wrong thinking again about the productivity is low. They cannot make they cannot provide the right food, the quality is not true. West Africa, I'm not talking about Africa. West Africa is only 2 countries, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. They have 70% of the cocoa in the world. It's 3 hectares, acre, not more than that.
So it's very nutritious,
So
what you're saying is the cocoa.
Yeah.
But you raise an interesting point here, which is when we talk about food production, it's not just any old crops, isn't it? I mean, these crops, in order to be nutritious, have to be more than just carbohydrate, be it maize, be it sorghum, or whatever your local crop is. And in fact, Stefan Tander from DSM, you're the only representative of the private sector here. DSM is a Dutch-based multinational corporation that deals a great deal with food, but a small part of your business is looking at this issue of micronutrients, where, I mean, to put it easily, you get the crop, you inject it with the various vitamins and nutrients that it needs in order to be a more wholesome crop. And in particular, your work is very important to you. I think it was you, Ernest, who mentioned the first 1,000 days of a child's life as being absolutely crucial to ensuring that they grow up much healthier. So perhaps you could talk to us about the role of the private sector in this particular regard, Stefan.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Before I go on the role of private sector, Zainab, I really want to put an even sharper focus on this nutrition topic. What we all have to realize, and I've been in the food business for a long time, I didn't realize it, is that just to eat the starchy grains such as wheat or sorghum or rice for that matter is not sufficient to provide good nutrition. And in particular, the first 1,000 days, so that means while the mother is pregnant, actually even before she's pregnant, and then the first 2 years of life play a crucial role. If the right micronutrients, being vitamins, minerals, but also some of the essential fatty acids are not present, the brain does not develop properly, physical stunting happens, and that child is condemned for the rest of her or his life to a different trajectory. We all talk about the right to life, but who talks about the right to the same chance to be successful in life? And if you have that nutritional deficit in that 1,000 days, chances are you're physically stunted, you don't learn as well in school, that you're more prone to disease, for sure not more resilient. And that knowledge is fairly recent. In fact, Minister Joe referred to the Lancet series that came out in 2008. That's when the first time, when it started to get into the consciousness that this is a huge issue where countries can make an enormous difference by targeting that 1,000 days. And I'm very happy to say that today, I think it's now 41 countries who have signed up to the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, or SUN. The United Nations, but many countries, the G8, all have now identified this as a key issue. The Copenhagen Consensus of Economists has identified nutrition intervention, especially in those early days, as the most financially returning, to put it very coldly, investment that you can do in development, returning 15, 16, 17 to 1. So this is not an issue, this is a key issue. Now, the role of the private sector here is, I would submit with all respect, all food comes from the private sector. All of you have eaten today. Guess what? That came from the private sector. And it's no different in African countries. The smallholder farmer is participant of the private sector. The crop needs to be harvested, it needs to be transported, it needs to be processed in factories or mills that need to make first sanitary safe, but then hopefully nutritious food with micronutrients added. So the private sector is an indispensable partner in providing that nutritious food. Then to your question, Zainab, about our role, we found that public-private partnerships here are indispensable. We started about 7 years ago with the World Food Program. The World Food Program used to only supply starchy grains. Today they have a food basket that is fortified, terms as Super Cereal Plus or Super Cereal Plus Plus with milk powder, micronutrients added. They have micronutrient powders, lipid nutritional supplements. That is a result of the public-private partnership touching millions of children every year. We've then started to work with public-private partnerships in country because also the World Food Program wants to buy locally and not bring the products in. Now, for those products to be locally available, that means millers need to know how to process those foods, how to, as you say, inject the macronutrients. And I can rattle off an example of these activities, but since my friend Ernest is here, we're also working on a project together in Rwanda, how to take the local harvest, get it processed locally into a porridge-based product that then can be fortified and sold and distributed also by the government locally. So it is very important that we build those value chains at the local level, at the country level. Nothing in food happens without the country leading. And I think many governments are now taking up that responsibility and inviting partners to help with that. And I think a really strong national plan is the essence to make the country nutrition and food resilient. And it starts from the farm and it ends at the plate or the bowl or wherever the food is consumed.
Thank you, Stefan. You raise a very crucial issue of partnerships there, obviously. I mean, you accept readily, and I think probably, I don't know, most people do, we'll find out, that the smallholder farmer is part of the private sector, but obviously very, very reliant on what the public sector, the politicians and the officials also do because they need proper infrastructure and, you know, that kind of background. So that brings us to Michael Hailu, who's director of CTA, one of the key organizers of this forum discussion we're having. But prior to taking up your position at CTA in May 2010, you worked in the World Agroforestry Center as well, Michael, and you've got degrees in information sciences, economics, and all the rest of it. But just looking at it from this partnership point of view, you know, what partnerships need to be enhanced to get the kind of policy change we need, to get the sustained change at both regional, national, and international level to work towards food security and better nutrition?
Thank you very much, Zainab. I'm very happy to be here. I think many of the speakers already highlighted the need to build strong partnership to achieve resilience in food and nutrition security. And one of the things that we are proud at CTA to be doing is to bring different stakeholders to the table in everything we do. And CTA being intergovernmental organization, you know, working with different groups, we find it quite convenient, you know, to bring different stakeholders together. And that includes, of course, policymakers, you know, governments, national governments in African, Caribbean, Pacific countries, as well as, you know, the donor communities from the EU and others. They use the farmers groups who have very strong partnership with the regional farmers organizations, and Khalilu works with us very closely, for example. So I think it's really important that you get a buy-in from different stakeholders, especially as you go into nutrition. I think it's been very clearly stated from the 2010 conference that IFPRI organized that one of the key constraints for achieving nutritional security is, you know, the lack of different government departments not working together. So it's very clear, and recently we launched a report in cooperation with one of the CGIAR programs on climate smart agriculture success stories, and basically we looked at 16 success stories across the developing world where large-scale climate-smart initiatives have been implemented, covering millions of hectares of land or affecting millions of people. And the central element in those success stories is that there is a very strong government engagement and leadership, and one of the examples was the productive safety net program Minister Costello referred to earlier, and farmer-managed natural regeneration in Niger and in West Africa. And all those, the key element was that there is a strong need for government commitment and leadership, buy-in from farmers groups, and also the technical national research institutions. Development partners, they are very much part of the planning and implementation of these projects. So it's really critical that, that we get engagement from different stakeholders. Another point, I think, again, Minister Costello raised it, the need to engage local communities, and especially have the indigenous knowledge of communities to contribute to resilience building. And we have done a lot of work supporting indigenous groups, local communities, using participatory mapping approaches to make sure that their inputs are incorporated in land use planning and in climate change adaptation programs. So we have done many of those projects in these countries. And what's very clear is that these tools help local communities to communicate with policymakers. They find it very difficult to make their voices heard through
so
normal
you actually
channels.
help them in the advocacy campaigns. Do you see that as part of your core work?
Yes, not only advocacy, but doing those 3D mapping and so on, they bring in the knowledge from older generations, younger generations, working together and building those models and using those models to discuss what are the adaptation measures that will be taken, what's the role of the government, what should be the role of the community, and so on. So we have very successful examples of that, which really help local communities to engage.
You mentioned the generations, and actually Kailulu mentioned something about the youth. We know that obviously Africa in particular has a very youthful population. What is it, 60% of the population is under 30, something like that. But just very quickly before we move on to Schengen, which is, do you find that there is sufficient appetite amongst the young of Africa to stay on the land? Because of course we know that there is a rural exodus, and that the population in Africa is becoming more and more urbanized.
Well, obviously there is a huge exodus of people from rural to urban areas, and the average age of farmers apparently is about 60 years old in many of the countries where we work, including Caribbean and Pacific as well. So basically there is that problem, and we have been also working in this area in terms of raising awareness and creating opportunities, for example, using information communication technologies, linking farmers to markets where young people could be much more interested in farming. But it's still quite a big challenge because it's seen as a low-paying, hard labor, to be staying in farms. So it requires policy changes and support from different stakeholders.
Very interesting. I mean, Schengen Fan, perhaps you could pick up on that particular aspect there. Schengen Fan, of course, is, as I said, Director General of the International Food Policy Research Institute. He's done a great deal of extensive research on pro-poor development strategies, not only in Africa, but also Asia and the Middle East. And you're currently chairman of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Food and Nutrition Security. So just taking us forward before we go to the floor, looking at the dynamics. This isn't a static situation that you are looking at, because it is changing, as we just heard Michael say, that the rural labor force is changing. So I wonder if you could give us your observations on that, but also what you think the key challenges for the future are in this debate.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Zana. Well, I'm going to talk to you, not to them, so I'm going to change my direction. Well, thank you for coming. It is you who will make the difference.
Towards them a bit.
For the last 7 years,
Thank you.
our global food system has become very vulnerable. You might remember in 2008, food prices increased by 50%, by 100% within 6 months, within 1 year. Many factors contribute to that: the climate change, the biofuel production. So even today, the food prices are very highly correlated with oil prices. The weather shocks have become very extreme, health, market. So all these factors behind the 2007, 2008 food crisis have not gone away. They're still with us. So the global food system resilience is a key issue. The national level, similarly, national level food system has also become very vulnerable. So lack of stocks, shocks to high-end typhoon, shocks to earthquakes. So many people are suffering from hunger and malnutrition. But more importantly, it's people, whether they are poor consumers or poor farmers. So they deserve good, nutritious food. Unfortunately, for the last 7 or 8 years, the access to nutritious food has not secured. So all these different levels of sort of insecurity, vulnerability, probably will continue if we don't take quick actions. Now, coming back to your question, Africa youth. Africa youth can play a huge role in transforming the whole agriculture sector in Africa. But don't try to push them to urban areas. They wanted to move to urban areas. They watch American TV, the European TV. They wanted to enjoy the city lives as you have enjoyed. But don't forget, in Africa, the industrialization is still yet to come. What would happen if the urbanization happens much faster than industrialization? Which means you will see a lot of young people move to cities without jobs. If they do not have jobs, you will have conflicts. They will create problems. The whole economic development will suffer. Can we make sure that these young people can convert agricultural farming to a profitable business? By providing land, providing financial services, credit services, technical services, I think we can. Just for your information, we have private sectors here, we have farmers organization, we also have donors. There is a very unique role of research organization. Stefan mentioned about the 1,000 days impact, the importance of resilience. So all this needs research support. So how come why today we focus on nutrition? This is because the research community really brought certain high-level, high-visible publications, including Lancet, into the world. So everybody pays attention to that. So, and there are many questions to be addressed. So this resilience, how do we define resilience? How can we work together as a system, not just one by one? So there are still a lot of knowledge gaps. So to address this, Zenek has mentioned that in 2014, May 15 to 17 in Addis Ababa, so IPRI is going to organize a big conference. It's called Building Resilience for Food and Nutrition Security. So we hope that through that conference, the different stakeholders can contribute to their thinking, to identify certain priority actions we can all work together to make sure that we can end hunger, malnutrition, much sooner than Marcos just mentioned. Marcos said that WHO had a vision of cutting stunting by 40% from now to 2020. This is not acceptable. Today, we still have high level of stunting. Many people are still suffering from hunger and malnutrition. We cannot wait. So we have to take much faster, urgent actions to address hunger and malnutrition issues.
Thank you, Schengen. Ernest, you wanted to come in?
Thank you. I want just to come back to the point that has been raised by my friend here from DSM. I think when you invest in nutrition, you invest in the future. The point that was being made here is we are trying to invest in the first 1,000 days. That's where children can have, you can face stunting, you can face underweight, and you can also have some problems when you are at big age. So when you invest then in nutrition, you invest in resilience. I want to come back to the private sector solution that we are piloting, or we are starting very soon with DSM and government. We are actually trying not only to invest in this program as a private sector, but also to invest in the whole farmers that are participating in productivity of raw material that will be used by DSM. Let's say if farmers are doing maize, those farmers that are doing maize are not necessarily those farmers who are facing the problem of malnutrition. But the maize farmers will participate in this venture because this private solution will have a very positive externalities also to other farmers who are not necessarily facing the problem of malnutrition. So this is really something that is really linked to one program, but has a very big externalities when it comes to create markets to farmers, when it comes to create market to farmers to different commodities. Here we are talking about maize, but also there are farmers who are doing soya, there are farmers who are doing milk. So all those farmers will have markets when we have this, let's say, factory in place, but also will be capable to produce baby food, which will be utilized by people who have problems of malnutrition. So that's really what I wanted to come back, that really investing in nutrition, you invest in resilience.
That's perspective from Rwanda, but I just wanted to ask Kailulu, does that resonate with you and what you see in West Africa at all? I mean, or do you think there's still an overemphasis on too much on production and not enough on the nutritional aspects?
Yes, I think there is a will to move to the value change, but the way is very wrong. The way to do it is very wrong. There is a will in all West Africa. Not only in West Africa, but on whole Africa, we can see when you meet the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Industry, there is a will, a real will to move. But how to move? That's a problem.
Is his way wrong?
No. For Rwanda, it's good. I think it's a good example, but we need to be more ambitious. But it's a good example. I told them, we are aware about it. For example, in Africa, all the country think that if you want to create the value chain, we need to grab the land to the private sector. They don't have in mind how to create a partnership between small farmers and the others, the private sector. It's the key. How to create this partnership. I think there is a weakness there. And that's where we need to look at how to make the difference.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you before we... Sorry, did you want to have a right to reply?
Also, I think it happened elsewhere. I think we cannot say that it can't happen in Africa as well, because there are models that can work. We are talking about contract farming. It's a way of linking farmers to big private people. We are talking about cooperative farming. It's a way of linking farmers. We are talking about subleasing. We are talking about corporate farming. Those are models that can be used to attract private sector and work together with farmers.
Okay,
thank you.
You want to come in here, Joe? Yeah.
I think the point is that Kalilu is making there is a very important one. The will is there. There is no doubt it has been building up from the donor community side. It has been building up in recent years. And we saw what happened at the G8 summit just the day before the G8 summit, where 4.2 billion was pledged for nutrition for growth. We see the G77 have come out in favour of the nutritional side. The European Union is fully committed since the Council conclusions of the last our presidency gone by. The United States is committed through US aid, but the question is, what is the action plan? What is the delivery mechanism? What is the engagement mechanisms? And how can you engage and establish partnerships from the global community, the national community, the government, and the local community on the ground, who must be key to it all? And I think this is probably now something that we have to face in the run-up to the Millennium Development Goals, how we're going to put an action plan together so that this generation eliminates malnutrition and deals with stunting and deals with all the mortality, infant mortality and maternal mortality that is taking place through malnutrition at the present time. But I think we're coming to the nub of where the problem is. The will is there, the money is coming on stream at last, but the partnerships that need to be built up are probably not there at the present time.
Thank you. Before I go to the floor, I wanted to ask, sorry, go on, Stefan, yeah.
Yeah, if I could just add on this, I couldn't agree more, and I think those action plans have to be, by and large, at a national level. When it comes to food, there is a country-by-country situation. You cannot do anything to food without the national government leading the charge, approving it, having the cross-ministry interactions like they have in Rwanda. I think the private sector will never lead that, but the private sector will follow the government. And with those 41 countries under the Sun Initiative already, I think we've seen great progress in putting these action plans together.
Before I go to the floor, I just wanted to ask you, Minister Florence Chenoweth from Liberia, a point that Kailulu made earlier on about youth, bringing them in. Your president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, has just been remarking yesterday and today about the demographic time bomb, not only in Liberia, but obviously other parts of Africa, where you have a huge number of young people. And I think she said that youth unemployment is something like 85% in Liberia. It's very, very high. How can you forge an agenda that acknowledges that and also incorporates the agenda that we're talking about now, improved food security and nutrition? Is there a way that you can do that?
Where one has the will, a lot can be accomplished. But when you are dealing with a post-conflict country situation, like in Liberia, where the conflict was almost 25 years in the making, you're bound to have the kind of demographic situation that we have. What is worse about those kinds of post-conflict situations is that you lose out on other things. Not only do you have your education, your country returns to you in a mess. Everything is broken down: law and order, governance, education. In our case, in Liberia, the intelligentsia was sought after and killed. And that is why trying to put things back or rebuild the country, we haven't got time to rebuild sector by sector, area of interest by area of interest. We are repairing the bus and driving it at the same time. We had people that had not gone to school forever. So we are trying to train them. So yes, the youth unemployment have another dimension in Liberia. They are largely unskilled and uneducated. And so trying to bring them back on stream is not as easy as one would think. But generally, on the continent, we do have too many young people that are not employed and too many young people that are not prepared for employment that presents for all of us a time bomb.
Thank you very much indeed for highlighting the particular challenges for post-conflict countries such as Liberia, and I know you've had similar experiences in Rwanda as well. And I mean, I know in my native Sudan, you know, when you look at the situation at Darfur, it's 10 years since the Darfur conflict came to everybody's attention, and to this day you have thousands and thousands of people displaced, unable to tend their agricultural land in Darfur, and sadly languishing in aid camps and relying on aid handouts. But There we are. Let's go to the floor. You've heard what our panel have to say. And in fact, in keeping with the tradition of these EU Development Days, we go to one of our youth ambassadors to put the first point or question. And it's you, this young lady here. Hello. Do introduce yourself and give us your point, please. Could we have a microphone? Ushers with the microphones. And yeah, one of you will do. Thank you. And then we'll go to the rest of the floor. Please do. Just please, if you could give the microphone as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Baik, selamat siang. Nama saya Restanti Waruwu, saya berasal dari Nias, Indonesia, dan berusia 16 tahun.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Restanti Waruwu. I came from Nias, Indonesia, and I am 16 years old.
Saya adalah duta anak yang didampingi oleh World Vision.
Malaysia.
I am a youth ambassador who is supported by World Vision.
Saya bersama dengan teman-teman di Indonesia turut serta dan berusaha dalam menangani masalah ketahanan pangan dan nutrisi, yaitu melalui kebun gizi.
Okay, my friends and I at Indonesia, recently we are trying to build food resilience by making nutrition garden in our home country.
Dan sekarang saya bersama dengan teman-teman mempunyai pertanyaan, yaitu bagaimana cara mengembangkan kapasitas dan kreativitas pemuda supaya kami terus dilibatkan dalam menangani masalah ketahanan pangan dan nutrisi. Lalu, apa langkah nyata yang harus dilakukan supaya anak dan remaja terus dilibatkan dalam implementasi pengambilan kebijakan mengenai ketahanan pangan dan nutrisi yang terus berkelanjutan?
Okay, today my friends and I have a question, which is how to develop children and youth creativity and capacity to solve nutrition and food insecurity, and how can we be involved furthermore to ensure the sustainability of food resilience policy implementation.
Sekian dan terima kasih.
That is my question.
Just
Thank
say
you.
the question one more time.
The question one more time. Okay. How to develop children and youth creativity and capacity to solve nutrition and food insecurity.
Did you get that? Yeah.
Yes, and how can we be involved furthermore to ensure the sustainability of food resilience policy implementation? Thank you.
Right, did you get that? Yes. Shangen, please do. Thank you very much indeed, representative from Indonesia. Thank you. Was it Indonesia, I think, not Malaysia, Indonesia. You want to answer that too, yeah. Shangen and then
Sure.
Marcus will address that
maybe
directly.
I'm from Asia, so that's why I understand what you're talking about. So how young people can be engaged in, let's say, achieving food and nutrition security. I think the young people have great opportunities to do that. This generation is very different from ours. Like my daughter is in high school. I mean, her thinking is very different from ours. So they are not struggling with day-to-day life, but they wanted to do something good for the world. Environmental sustainability, hunger reduction, malnutrition reduction. I think I should congratulate to this young generation. You know, they are very much engaged. Now, I think how they can engage. This young generation have access to lots of information, the internet, all kinds of social media. So from there, you can organize yourself to really push some sort of socially responsible actions you can take together. I think you mentioned about your nutrition garden in Indonesia. That was a great example. So nutrition garden, the so-called homestead food production. So instead of selling to the markets, they can have a little garden to produce the vegetables, fruits they want for their family, for their children, and even probably for, to the market. I know that some of the school children, whether it's high school children or middle school children, do that after their homework. So they can do a lot to contribute. So when you do some sort of thing like that, you can actually, let's say, scale them up to a very large community. So I think the young people has a great potential to do that by accessing to modern technologies like ICT technologies, information, to inform your parents as well, because the parents in many parts of the world, the parents are not as educated as you are. IPRI, my organization, did a study to look at how school children can help their parents to access to extension knowledge. So that was a very good example.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Cheng. And briefly, Marcus, from the EU, European Commission.
Thanks for the question. Great to have a young voice here opening the public debate. I link this just to two comments we had made earlier in our presentation. The one, multi-sectoral, was something mentioned. I think this is a very good example that if a government were serious about food insecurity, to build this into the curricula of schools. And I think the way a 16-year-old can be encouraged to do sort of private gardening at home is an excellent example to take this out to schools. And secondly, yes, we spoke about the level of engagement required for anything we're talking about resilience. And there's certainly the entry point for sustainability would be to see that at household level. And again, a household garden, I think, is a wonderful example you brought here to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for bringing us that youthful perspective. I have 4 teenagers. I need to build up my resilience against them. But anyway, can we take comments from the floor, please? And stand, introduce yourself, keep your comment. Doesn't have to be a question, can be a comment as well. Keep it brief and to the point, and we'll take a collection. Please stand. Microphone can go to somebody else as well. Please stand and fire away, briefly.
Thank you very much. Briefly, Zainab, I want to bring on the table 2 main issues.
Just say who you are, please.
I'm Sheikh Mo, working for the World Agroforestry Center in Nairobi. Two main issues here. I agree with everything which has been said, but there is one aspect or 2 aspects which are important. The first one is the post-harvest issue, how to handle the food we are producing already. Coming from Senegal and seeing all this effort in irrigation in the area of the river of Senegal, there is a lot of production taking place, but a huge proportion of this production is lost because of post-harvesting issue. The second point I want to make is the food versus cash dilemma. Sila mentioned it, cocoa in Cote d'Ivoire, but how much different cocoa have been made in the local farmers in terms of income generation at the end of the day. That's the peanut case in Senegal. That's the cotton case in Mali. The necessary balance we need to make between the quantity of food we need to produce for local communities and the need of cash. What is your perspective in the strategy we should take in that perspective?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. 2 very pertinent points. Yeah, who's got the microphone? Stand and make your point.
Hello, my name is Federica Labbadia and I work for an Italian NGO.
Put it close to your mouth, yeah.
Yeah. What I didn't understood so well is that often we are talking for the private sector, and you are not including small farmers in the private sector. But small farmers are more considered like a beneficiary of a project concerning agricultural development. And so I didn't understand when we are talking about private sector and we are not including small farmers, what are we talking about? Who is part of this private sector? And secondly, I would like to have, for example, from Liberia and Rwanda, an example of practical policies that are being implemented in order to enhance the agricultural development.
I gave you plenty of examples of practical policies, I thought, but there we go. Okay.
Hello.
You've got them. Who's got the microphone? Yep, stand.
My name is Neil Smith from HelpAge International España. Thank you very much for an interesting debate. This is an issue that was touched upon very briefly, and our research confirms that, in fact, rural populations in developing countries are aging, and that we are seeing older people assume a greater role in smallholder farming. The figures coincide with the figures that were mentioned at the table, that up to 40% of agricultural holders in sub-Saharan Africa are 55 years or older. However, they are also disproportionately affected by food insecurity, many of them at the same time caring for the younger generation. So the question is, shouldn't we be putting greater emphasis on older people in food security, nutrition and resilience policy and programming?
Thank you. Who else has got the microphone? This side was that? Yep, fire away. Put it close to your mouths, everybody. Yep.
Hello, my name is Celine Meas. I'm from Counter National, and I listened with much interest and of course, very much support the multi-sectoral approach that was promoted by most of the speakers. There was just one element that seemed to be really missing to me, and it's the role of women in resilience for food security. I know the gentleman from Rwanda mentioned the important role of women as smallholder farmers, but more generally, the role of women in resilience. Like here.
Okay, yeah, who else?
Ann Simmons-Benton from Development Alternatives, Inc. Basically the same question, but I wondered if we could look at women and the mapping of the population, looking at some of the tools that you are suggesting, both in food security and nutrition.
Yeah, who else has got the microphone?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is Muhammad Yassin from University of Udine in Italy. Just a question. As it has been mentioned that there is sufficient food to nourish all the population of the world, but still we have prevalence of hunger. And it also has been mentioned that there is, we know the pathways to tackle these problems, these challenges, but we don't know how to implement, how to go through that pathways. In Africa, now we are, it seems that we are facing new challenges in the sense that there are huge investments in agriculture, but these investments are not irresponsible investment in agriculture. So, it is that investments which are depriving the smallholder farmers from the ownership of their lands and other resources. So how we are resolving problem from this part, and then we will be addressing new challenges again. So how we can go again? How we can proceed forward when we are aware that we are facing these challenges? Thank you.
Who else wanted to make a point? Yeah.
Sabine Al-Khair at OFI, University of Oxford. Thank you very much to the panel. You mentioned the global numbers of hunger, and yet to address those, South Asia cannot be overlooked, and a disproportionate burden of responsibility falls to the people and government of India. So I'd be very interested in any of the panel's reflections on India's food security bill and its approach to this issue. I know that Professor Gendrez should be at EDD tomorrow, but I'd be very interested in your views. Thank you.
What was it, India's food security, did she say? Yeah. Any other points? Okay, thank you very much indeed for your contributions from the floor. We've got some very, very interesting points there. Maybe I'll ask some of you to answer those particular points. Let's just do it in order. There was the point from the World Forestry representative who talked about the issue of post-harvest and the fact that a lot of food goes rotten, and then also that balance between food crops versus cash crops. Michael?
Well, obviously the issue of post-harvest is very critical in many parts of Africa. You know, we are losing up to 40% of crops through post-harvest losses. And also on the other side, on the consumption side, of course, food waste is a big problem. So on these issues, we had also in Brussels had policy discussion on how to address some of these issues. And basically, I think what's important is, again, the multi-sectoral approach that we need to take, and the whole value chain approach that's also important to look at, you know, including the linkages from smallholders to private sector and so on, to see how we address all these issues. A lot of the research focus and the policy focus has been very much on increasing productivity up to now. But it's obvious that we need to move away from that and look at the entire, from production to consumption, the entire value chain.
Okay, and Kalulu White, since you're Ivorian, this issue of cash crops versus food crops, Ivory Coast obviously is still the world's biggest, well, has resumed its position as the world's biggest cocoa producer, big export earner, of course. Yeah.
That's policy. If you have a current policy, you have this kind of result. If you want to do cocoa, you have all the support. You have, if you want to produce cocoa, you have all the support. You have research, you have cash, you have, pesticide. But if you want to do rice or maize, you have nothing. That's the reality. You have nothing. That's why it's the first producer of cocoa in the world, and the last one in the rice production, for example. They're exporting more than 60%. But it's not the case of Cote d'Ivoire only. It's also the case of Senegal. It raised the fact also. It's also the case of Ghana. It's also the, so here we have a kind of shift to do in kind of policy. If you focus in Cote d'Ivoire, 30% or 40% of the revenue of the government come from cocoa. You can see. But at the other side, you rightly mentioned it, you have nothing for the producer of cocoa. So that's a kind of shift you are looking for, and this is at the institutional level, the priority. And is very hopeful that in West Africa, there is a kind of, the government are aware. If you look at the 5 priority products in West Africa, we don't have cocoa, we don't have cotton, we have food. You have rice, you have meat, you have maize, but you have corn, but you don't have cocoa, you don't have cotton. That's, I think we are going in the good direction for now.
Okay, thanks. And maybe one of the donor nations, or the EU or Ireland, at that point from the Italian NGO about, you know, who is part of the private sector, that the farmers are seen very much as recipients of donors.
I mean, I would just use the question to reinforce a point we were trying to make, and in fact you were trying to make it, that yes, smallholders are farmers and private sector and should be primarily being addressed as a private sector, which could actually lead to a sustainable way of income. But of course, some of the smallholders are also sort of consumers and still in need of additional assistance, and this could sometimes come in terms of cash, or sometimes also in terms of other incentives to beef up slightly the household level of security.
That point from, I think it was Australia, which was rural populations are aging, and should we not make this debate really more age-focused? Who would like to take that up? Schengen? Yeah?
Well, okay, probably it's very relevant for some of the Asian societies. The China, Vietnam, the rural population are aging very fast. In my village, when I go back to my village, everybody is older than 65 or 70. They're doing farming. However, it's not necessarily very negative. If you have the right policy, for example, if the land can be transferred among the neighbors or among between the investors and owners, it actually creates opportunity. So in my village, the whole land used to be owned by small farmers. Now a young investor came to my village and leased this land together and built the greenhouses on top of that. And the smallholders gain 2 sources of income. One is rent, the other is employment. Because the young investor also hire these elderly farmers to do weeding, watering, so 2 sources of income. So it's a policy, institutions that really matter. However, for Africa, I'm very worried about that the young people are leaving the rural areas without jobs in the cities.
And while you've got the microphone, Schengen, that point from Oxford University about, I think it was India specific, wasn't it, looking at the issue of food security? I think it was India, wasn't it?
Right.
I couldn't hear.
India just released a very large sort of national food security bill that has been debated for several years. So last year it was, so this year it was passed by their parliament. I have to say it's a great bill, it's a great legislation, so make sure that everybody has access to affordable food, which is great. However, there are some concerns. The one is the cost. You know, the large coverage will involve a lot of money. The money is not free. So that money can also be used to improve production. So more production, so the lower prices, so people can access to more affordable food. And on the other hand, then this large coverage could also lead to leakage, corruption. So how can we really strengthen the distribution system to make sure that the food, nutritious food, will be distributed to the people who really truly need.
And that links actually to that question about post-harvest issues, because distribution is a huge problem. In India, 40% of the produce just rots. There was the question from Mohammed Yassin here, just on the left, and perhaps you could answer that, Ernest, about it's not a problem of a lack of food, or lack of production, lack of food, but it's a lack of access. And that you often, we've all seen it, the juxtaposition of markets bulging with food, and next to them people who are literally starving and malnourished. So it's the question of access is important.
Yeah. The question of access is important, but it depends on how you define food security as well. The food security is not only about availability. Food security is availability, access, stability, and nutrition. So those key parameters are really key for food security. So, and food security is not agriculture. That's where the element of access is coming. That's how do you give opportunity to people to increase their income, to have income so that they can buy their food, which is available, or which can be also imported. So giving opportunity to people to increase their income is really something which can be out of agriculture, but which contributes to food security.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do our closing remarks in reverse order. Briefly, if you were just a minute, all of you. And Minister Florence, perhaps you could incorporate in your closing remarks the two questions about gender and the role of women. I mean, access to land and property rights and that kind of thing is very vital when you look at the smallholder for women. But remember, panel, we were here to discuss about the fact that we all know about withstanding shocks and so on when you have, extreme climatic impact like Typhoon Haiyan, but there's much less understanding about resilience within the context of food and nutrition security and how we must try and invest in these policies to bring about sustained change and improvement in this. So just your parting thoughts, please, to our panel here, starting with you, Schengen, because I'm doing it in reverse order.
Okay, firstly, I have a comment about distribution of food. Yes, we might have enough production, so can we just simply redistribute the food to the poor? The answer is probably no, very difficult. It's a distribution of food production, not consumption. Smallholders are hungry. Smallholders are poor, but they do not have means to produce enough food for their own consumption, for their market. So fixing smallholders' problem will help you to resolve lots of redistribution or distribution problem. Now, on resilience, I think we should also go beyond simply just as recovery, quick recovery. So that's a typical definition. We also wanted to make sure that poor and hungry people recover from crisis, shocks, and to move to the right track, to the prosperity. And that needs a lot of support. So the donors, our investors, the research organizations, civil societies, the policymakers have a very important role to play. So I hope next year, May 15 to 17, we can all come to Addis Ababa to debate about this important issue.
You're inviting us all, Schengen. We'll be there. Michael, your home country, Ethiopia, but you're not going to talk about that. But yes, your parting thoughts, please.
Definitely, I will be at that conference for sure.
You got one take.
Well, anyhow, we're one of the co-organizers with IFPRI. Well, I think my key message would be that the whole issue of partnership is critical, but it has to be laid by the national governments in terms of setting policy and having strong commitments and very good engagement of the local community and farmers organizations. And on the issue of youth, unless we really engage the youth in agriculture, I think the future is bleak. So that means policy support, awareness building, creating opportunities, and really transforming agriculture into a business. Otherwise, it won't attract young people to go back to farming.
Thank you. Stefan, your closing remarks, please.
Well, actually, I wanted to pick up a role of women also. Let's face it, women are the educators of the family. They also often are most of the time, community health workers are women. So there's a huge education gap about the role of nutrition, all the things we talked about, 1,000 days, the importance of good nutrition before pregnancy, during pregnancy, the importance of breastfeeding. So I think there's a huge importance around education. Secondly, of course, key participant in the private sector as a smallholder farmer. And the second point I wanted to make is reinforce again that all food comes from the private sector. So solutions, multi-sectoral solutions are very hard to do without the private sector's involvement.
Thank you. It was Kalilu. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think it's important to have this kind of discussion in particular, and I was happy to be here. For me, one of the area where we don't invest a lot is institutional reform. How to build institution, how to be the first to be a reform in Africa is one of the key for me. We cannot wait only for the donors to come and to say this is a priority, we need to move forward. And to do that, one of the key area where you need to look at is the reform, but institution is a key. The second one is how to create a partnership between, in the viable environment, between private sector and farmer and the other private sector. The regional market, we don't talk about it. We cannot achieve resilience without regional market. If you look at Burkina Faso and Nigeria, we understand why. The number of chicken eaten in Nigeria by here is the GDP of Burkina Faso. That's simple, something real. So we can move forward with this one. And I don't want to make more, but let me finish by one point I have in heart relating to the partnership. How to raise partnership is also one key. We just wait for the partner. No, we don't have to partner with everybody. We have to select them, the appropriate one. That's also one key. Waiting for partners is not the strategy, good strategy. A good strategy to select them. And to do that, we need to raise partner, but the appropriate one. Thank you.
Thank you. Marcus, briefly, if you would, all of you from now on.
Yeah, I would just like to reinforce one point, and namely that the resilience and nutrition agenda does not only make developmental sense, but also profound economic sense. And in fact, if you look at any of the programs, you would see that investing at household level, say for a family, lift them up, would say take you 100 euros. If you have to help that family through a famine, it would cost you 300 euros, 3 times as much. After all that effort, except for public attention, you would still be at the starting point. So with a third of the effort, you can actually get a sustainable agenda going. The challenge here is only that we just don't get enough world attention to be preventive. And this is where hopefully that panel and counting on media and the audience also to carry that forward would go in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you. Minister Joe Costello.
Yeah, back to where we started. Resilience is central to everything. It is a holistic approach. You look at nutrition, youngsters have to be healthy in mind and body. We need to move on to education so that people can progress. And of course, that's one of the failures of the MDGs to date, is the quality of education. While we have been very successful in getting youngsters into school at primary level, the quality has been poor. And then to move on to the area of the smallholders and the farmers in particular. And I think that's probably a key area, because unless you can move that on from civil society on the one hand, depending in a dependent situation, up to the private sector and the marketability, then it's going to be very hard to make progress. And that's the key area. That's 80% of the pretty much 80% of the population of Africa. So there has to be a major focus in that area, and that can only be done through partnerships, through working through the donor community, to the national, to the local, and establishing local partnerships there where, in fact, the solutions come from the ground up. And I think that's the ultimate key to what we've been talking about.
Thank you. Ernest?
Thank you. For building resilience, I think
talking to the microphone, yeah.
the people-centered development approach is really key. Because if you want to build resilience in your people, you need to invest in them. You need to invest in programs that are really centering your people in your development agenda. Again, second thing is that we don't have to wait for solutions that come out from outside. Homegrown solutions can be one of the solutions to this problem. Another thing is that partnership is really key, because it's good to have a good program, but you need to have partners to implement your program. Thank you.
Thank you. And final word, Minister Florence Chenoweth from Liberia, including the gender issue. You haven't talked enough about that. You've done a lot on it, I know, but you've not talked enough about it today, apparently.
There's no way that I can miss on the role of women in agriculture. Just look at me, I'm one of them. But on a serious note, women in agriculture in Liberia means when you talk about a farmer, she is a woman. Sadly, she is 50 years old minimum. That is why we have to look at her, or look at them, not only from what we can do to increase their workload, but what we can do to decrease the burden that they carry. So not only providing them with inputs, including to the extent that we have them improve varieties of seed and other planting materials, but also the tools that they use so that they don't have to work as hard. Post-harvest loss, I am happy you mentioned it. We should have mentioned that because not everything you can say across Africa, that is one thing that is a problem for us. We need to pay more attention. Farmers work too hard to lose as much as they do from post-harvest losses. Land policy, I know that it is an issue of land ownership across the continent. I can tell you in our own case in Liberia, we have dared to go there. We have a land policy program ongoing, but just even without this, when it comes to land to farm, the typical small farmer has not in the past and do not now have a problem of where to grow their small patches of crops. What they do have problems with is that if they do not have that piece of paper or of ownership to land, they will not grow long-term crops, and they are smart not to. So we are addressing that issue. And by the way, we say every time we have an opportunity to do so, Liberia is not open to the land grab. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister, and thank you indeed to all our panel. I think that you've heard their closing remarks, obviously some very key themes that have emerged when we're talking about building resilience for food security and better nutrition. Partnership seems to be a very, very key message that you must all take away from here, but the right partnerships, as Kalilu said, and also obviously a very integrationist approach at government level, both regional, local and central, and obviously an inclusive approach whereby you don't just speak on behalf of those stakeholders, but get everybody involved. Obviously, best practice is very important, knowledge sharing, knowledge transfer from the private sector. It's not just a question of production, we heard, but also producing the right kind of nutritious food. We've heard about the balance between inputs into food crops versus cash crops. So a lot of things to take away from here, but the key thing is I think that we need to act very, very quickly because, as our panel have said, people are in a desperate situation right now, hungry, malnourished, and it's really, we've said it before so many times, we've heard it. We can't wait until Addis Ababa in May next year. I think it's go forward, onwards for this agenda. I hope you have found this afternoon very interesting, enlightening, and inspiring. I know I have. Thank you indeed to all our panel. Thank you to you for your attention and those of you who made contributions from the floor. From me, Zainab Badawi, goodbye. Thank you very much.